scary times where we all work from home and many public transport services are being halted or only running essential services. We have a bit of time to reflect as how did we get there and what are the technologies and business models most suitable going forward.
In the last 30 years, we've seen a tremendous ride for the transit fare payment industry. And I always like to compare this with sort of the history of our beloved video technologies. So back in the day, when we were used to our VHS videotapes, we used to queue up in stations and ticket offices to buy magnetic paper tickets. Then, in the era of DVDs, we were introduced to the slick, contactless smart card taps. And today, in the age of Netflix and Amazon Prime, cities simply need to subscribe to fare payment services and remove the need for any dedicated physical media, empowering riders to use whatever technology they already have in their pockets, like contactless bank cards and mobile phones. And so for me, the three biggest learnings during this journey have been the fact that we no longer need to carry with us a physical ticket. Number two, that we no longer need to inspect a fare table as we delegate fare selection to a best fare finding algorithm. And lastly, and most importantly, cities don't need to build their own custom solution. They can simply subscribe to an existing fare payment system.
Personally, I've been involved in public transportation payments in 2003 when I joined Philips Semiconductors, a company now called NXP. Philips was and likely still is the leading technology provider for transit payments. Technologies all based on RFID. RFID has been the most used technologies to date for collecting transit payments in networks with high throughput and high security requirements. Since 2010, I'm the founder of a company that provides consultancy services and partial solutions to the transport payment industry, especially in emerging economies. I focus on emerging economies as this is the larger untapped market for transport payments. It is easy to make a system that is fast and transparent for a market where the average bus ride is between $3 and $4 versus a market where the average fees for a ride is maybe 15 cents. In about 80% of all cases globally, this is still the case. By the way, if I talk easy, I don't mean to disrespect the immense technical and especially political complexity that goes into rolling out any payment or any transit payment solution. Over the years, I've learned many lessons, and I would like to share a few. The first one, I think there's no successful solution without involvement from the government. We see that there is a big role to play for the government in any of the transit payment solutions. In many emerging countries, the government like to leave the transport payment solutions to the private sector, and it almost never works. Secondly, there's also no successful implementation without involvement from the private sector. The private sector is more agile, more cost efficient way of operation and can deploy much faster. The third lesson I would say is that many technologies that used to be very difficult to obtain and very expensive to implement are now almost standardly available. Embrace all those standards. That would be my one of my lessons. I always take the example that in my own company we have developed a large key management storage solutions based on HSM, hardware security modules. It took us 4 or 5 years to develop this solution, and just about the time we were finishing it, Amazon Web Services or AWS offered the same services for less than $150 a month. Same is for many parts of the system, like synchronization between the terminals and the backend, like data management, like securities, and a few others.
And so the evolution in the transit space has seen the emergence of a range of new services and technologies. Top of mind are about 4 or 5 items. Number one, account-based ticketing. This is where the data and intelligence traditionally stored on legacy cards or printed on paper tickets is transferred to a cloud-based back office. Second is mobility as a service. This is where we're stitching together wayfinding with fare payments and first and last mile into one seamless user experience. Thirdly, on-demand services that are plugging the gap that isn't serviced by sort of trunk mass transit services like scheduled buses or metro. And finally, the concept that cities are moving away from building their own custom solutions and towards more of a subscription model. This is where large custom deployment associated with traditional build and maintain procurement can be replaced with a software as a service model, where agencies sign up and subscribe to an existing ticketing service. This model allows any city to access the greatest level of innovation without the overhead of designing, procuring, and hosting their own custom-built system.
Transit payment as we know it started in the late 90s. Cities like Hong Kong, Tokyo, Singapore moved from cash or tokens to systems based on RFID. Systems based on RFID were faster, more secure, more transparent, and could increase the throughput. We installed systems called automatic fare collection, or AFC, where the fees are being calculated based on the travel you make, distance-based or time-based, and deducted from your media without any manual intervention. Contactless cards with stored monetary value on the card became, and still are, the most adopted technology for this. In China alone, there are more than 600 cities today that use advanced transit payment technologies and log daily more than hundreds of millions of transactions. Globally, probably more than 1,000 cities today are logging transactions based on transit payments, based on RFID solutions. Personally, I've been involved in set up or helped to set up a large number of transport operators. For instance, in China, in Russia, in Sri Lanka, in Philippines, in Netherlands, UAE, and Nepal.
Banks and technology companies entering this sector will quickly become familiar with much longer lead times and complex procuring processes, which are really there to provide necessary checks and balances to deliver confidence that public funds are being allocated fairly and responsibly.
80% of all transport is run by thousands of small operators that don't have a small IT department, that cannot follow the latest technologies. Operators can have 1 bus, 2 buses, 20 buses, 500 buses. Most certainly don't have the investment power to set up large deployments. Still, they like to keep the same level of control. They like to guarantee their income, to make sure they know where their income goes. Transport operators are very bullish, sometimes even macho. Delivering solutions as a service, cloud-based, you might address some of these smaller operators with cookie-cutter models. Transportation is running on razor-thin margins. Most of the time, routes are loss-making. Subsidies from the government is necessary to keep even the standard buses running. Standardization of services makes it feasible for smaller operators to do the bulk of the transactions, also to embrace of this technology. The second point to understand is that emerging markets, the drivers of these solutions are different. Where in urban markets, the implementation of a contactless payment solution, transit payment solution, is to speed up the transaction, to increase the convenience of the passenger. This is not so much the case in emerging markets. Emerging markets, it is also done for increasing the revenue for the operator, but mainly by reducing the pilferage from the conductor or driver or bus staff. An important lesson, therefore, is to learn that in many emerging countries and even in many developed countries, the bus staff is not your friend. The bus staff is not a friend of the automatic fare collection. It reduces them a source of income and feeling of empowerment. It is extremely essential to make them part of the solution. Else he will resist, and he will likely succeed in that resistance. In our case, we generally now deliver the model conductor as a service, which means that the entire collecting of transport payments inside the buses and on the inside the systems is part of the payment service provider. The conductor becomes an employee of the payment service provider. This is a new model that reduces the resistance significantly and turn many of the solutions into a success.
Developing countries have the opportunity to leapfrog legacy ways of doing things and focus on a much more digital approach, which requires less infrastructure and less upfront investment, freeing up funds for core mass transit services, things like vehicles and stations, laying down track, bridges, and so forth.
In my country, the Netherlands, the average ticket price for a simple bus ride is $3 to $4. In emerging countries, the price is between 15 to 20 cents. This is a factor 20. All business models and technologies that are suitable for developed countries are likely not suitable for emerging economies. On the other hand, for transit payments are much more available for emerging countries. Where in the early 2000s to set up a transport system for, let's say, 1,000 buses would cost you multi-millions of dollars in total investment, we now run these systems of similar size for far less than $1 million US. Solutions are cloud-based, centrally managed. Many of the necessary services that used to be massive investments, like key storage, security development, are now affordable and standardized. Standardized in Amazon as an Amazon service, as a Google service, or as an Android module. You will see the same for new technologies currently being rolled out for EMV, ABS, facial recognition, account-based ticketing, and others.
What has really held the industry back has been a culture of prescriptive technical specification. And this has often prevented innovation and not really allowed some of the new ideas to solve old business problems.
Well, this is a very interesting question. For me, this is clearly the adoption of NFC in mobile phones. I'm convinced that we would be using NFC to pay for public transport ticketing globally, almost everywhere, if this technology, which was ready in 2007, was not hijacked by some parties unrelated to public transportation. We were on an NFC stalemate for about 10 years, until Google and Apple finally reclaimed the technology at the time that, especially in Asia, China and QR code payments already taken over the void of mobile phones. I'm convinced that we would all be using our smartphone and NFC for tap in, tap out if mobile operators would have been enabling public transport system instead of resisting. Where to next in the development markets with high payments, card penetration, and relatively high fares? The load of public transportation and other transportation will rise significantly over the coming years and double in the year 2030. While I believe the effects of COVID-19 and home working will flatten this curve for quite a long time, the infrastructure still will not be able to keep up with the demand. Additional services like rideshare, bike share, shuttle will be much more important and must be incentivized to work with public transport and not against. What would it do for congestion and traffic in a major city if your Uber gets incentivized to bring you to the next train station instead of all the way to your end destination? And that this was all part of the same journey.